tenemos que hablar del caso de Julian Assange. Y
yo ya sabía.
¿Ah?
Sí, entonces tengo un invitado buenísimo, te va a gustar.
Híjole, pues yo también traigo uno buenísimo.
No, pero el mío está mejor.
No, pero el mío es una gente muy cercana a Assange.
No, el mío es más cercano, seguro que es más cercano.
Ah, ¿ya llegó el mío?
No, el mío es mejor, mira. Gabriel Shipton.
John Shipton, el padre de Julian Assange.
¿Es el papá de Julian Assange? Y es el hermano de Julian Assange.
Ay, bueno, pues tenemos que hablar de un asunto familiar.
Let me introduce your father.
Tomen asiento, por favor. Bueno, pues es un placer tener aquí en el Chamuco TV al padre y al hermano de Julian Assange. Estamos convencidos de que Julian Assange es el periodista más importante de nuestros tiempos y estamos convencidos de que está sufriendo una persecución absolutamente grotesca y absurda. Yo le quisiera preguntar a John, qué implicaciones tiene la prisión y la persecución a Julian Assange?
Well, it means for Julian unrelenting malice and vicious hatred and 13 years of unscrupulous lies and slander. That's for human rights. It means that the abrogation of the great civil artifacts that came into being in the late 20th century, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Conventions of Asylum, and due process have all, in the case of Julian Assange, collapsed. And he has faced now moving to the 13th year in arbitrary detention. Now, I don't say these things. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention declared it so, that Julian was arbitrarily detained. And I don't say that Julian has been psychologically tortured, although I believe it's to be true and evident. The United Nations Rapporteur on Torture makes that statement to the United Nations General Assembly, which is accepted by the General Assembly. Both of those instruments from the United Nations were ignored by the United Kingdom, by Sweden, and by the United States. So, as you can see, we're in a dire circumstance of the collapse of the rule of law.
Hay un movimiento, yo diría que mundial, a favor, apoyando a Julian Assange y exigiendo que sea sacado de la cárcel y que se regrese a Australia. Ustedes están, evidentemente, en este movimiento y además ahora con un documental que se va a presentar en México por estos días y tú eres el productor, Gabriel, de este documental. Platícanos un poco de lo que cuenta esta película.
Well, the documentary is called Ithaca. It's a feature documentary. It's really about John and Stella's fight to free Julian. So it's a humanistic telling of the story. We started to make it in 2019. I went to see Julian in the prison there, and he was, I'd never seen him like that before. He was being kept in what they call the health wing of the prison, which is, the prisoners actually call it the hell wing. It's where they keep the most suicidal, the terminally ill prisoners. And I left the prison that day thinking, that I might not see Julian again. So we started to think, how do we, because Julian's been so dehumanized in the media, in Western media. He's been turned, into somebody who doesn't feed his cat or somebody who is a bad house guest, all these sort of things that shouldn't really matter about Julian. But what we attempted and set out to do with Ithaca was to humanize him again. Julian is a human being, and people, a lot of people, particularly in the West, are able to forget that conveniently, and so his persecution becomes tolerable for a lot of people because they see him as a, not as a human being, but as something who, as somebody who, has been totally demonized, dehumanized, and mobbed in the media.
Porque así como hay todo un movimiento mundial apoyando a Julian Assange, hay una campaña bastante fuerte para condenarlo, para estigmatizarlo, para descalificar su trabajo, que es finalmente lo importante en esto, ¿no? Se ha dicho mucho que finalmente está en la cárcel por decir la verdad, ¿no es así? John?
Well, you know, every single parliament in Europe has an Assange cross-party group in it. As in the case of Greece, which is very strong, there's 300 parliamentarians, 90 of them are in the Assange group. In the Bundestag, in the German parliament, in the French parliament, in the Norwegian parliament, even in the parliament of Luxembourg, there's cross-party group. In the United Kingdom parliament, in the Spanish parliament. Every single major head of state in South America at one time or another has supported the freedom of Julian Assange. The government in Australia was recently elected about 100 days ago on an Assange platform. So you can get you can get into government if you say that we are going to go about bringing freedom to Julian Assange. This indicates the tremendous depth and strength that the people of the world feel about the incarceration and intolerable show trial that Julian has had to undergo.
Gabriel tocó un tema que es muy importante y es el hecho de que esta campaña mediática que busca deshumanizar a Julian Assange siempre es la antesala de algo más serio. Siempre es la antesala que permite justamente la violación a los derechos humanos. ¿Cómo es posible que el país que se presenta a sí mismo como el gran defensor de los derechos humanos, como el gran defensor de la libertad de imprenta, cómo es posible que este país sea precisamente el que persigue a Julian Assange? ¿Qué nos dice esto de la barbarie que impera hoy en el mundo?
Yeah, I think the persecution of Julian is emblematic of this descent into barbarity that we're seeing. You know, as John said, these sort of great pillars of our society that came after World War II have all been destroyed in Julian's case, and in that way, Julian's persecution is almost like another leak. In that sense, it's exposing the lengths that these corrupt parties, corrupt governments, governments who have been exposed for committing war crimes or torture, it exposes the lengths that they will go to silence the people who expose their crimes. So I think, you know, we're just seeing this collapse of this, you know, Julian's emblematic of this collapse, of this descent. And I think that's why so many people are getting behind him, because, you know, we want our societies to be transparent. We want to know what our governments do. We want to know who we're voting for. We want to know what our governments do with our tax dollars. You know, the foreign wars and things like that, people sending their kids to war, they want to know that they're not going for a lie. So I think that's why we're seeing all this support that John was talking about all around the world. And it's growing and growing. You know, poll in Australia, poll after poll, you know, the last poll, 71% of people agreed with the statement that Julian should be brought home. Yeah, and then the next one, 88%. Now there's only 12% of people in Australia who disagree that Julian should be brought home. And it's the same all over the world. You know, just recently, 90 German parliamentarians voted to make Julian an issue on all their committees. So now you have a German-American friendship committee in the German parliament who has Julian's freedom as part of their agenda. So now Germans are travelling to the US. They're there in Washington at the moment, German politicians, talking to their counterparts about Julian's freedom. And I think there's this worldwide movement, as you say, you know, and what UMLO is doing as well is incredible in the sense that shows that the world has been reorganized as well. And so the power centers are now moving, and leaders are now able to say to the US, look, no, we don't agree. We can push back on that. And I think that's, really, Julian's emblematic of that as well.
Anthony Albanese, el primer ministro australiano,
Yes.
Dijo que enough is enough, que ya era suficiente. Pero eso lo dijo pues, públicamente, pero realmente está haciendo algo. Ustedes ya hablaron con él, ¿sí está realmente haciendo algo? ¿Creen en él?
Yeah. I mean,
Perdón.
Okay. And that was during the election campaign, right? Politicians during elections, they make all sorts of promises. And then, so after the election, he said, well, foreign policy is not done with a bullhorn or a loud hailer. So, trying to say to the public, well, we're doing something, but we're doing it, behind closed doors. So, but don't worry, trust us, we're doing something. But I mean, I wish that our government would follow AMLO's example, just doing the negotiations behind closed doors, but also making public, what you're doing, putting that pressure on. I think that's what's really needed. Otherwise, Julian will never be free if we, always trying to do something behind the scenes, but not using those other levers.
I mean, our participation as Julian's family, and the participation of parliamentarians worldwide, and the participation of the Human Rights Council of Europe, and the statements made by the Austrian government and the Federation of Switzerland, Swiss government, all of these are tools that the Australian government can utilise to bring pressure on the United States, or on the Washington administration, because we did a tour of the United States, 16 cities, and we had tremendous support. So it's not the American people who are doing this, it's Washington, and it's a policy that comes from certain institutions in Washington. So we can assist the Australian government. AMLO assists the Australian government by courageously saying, well, we'll offer Assange asylum. He can make a home here in Mexico. He can make Mexico City his home. And this gives courage to other prime ministers and parliamentarians. Lula, whenever he's in Europe at the same time as Gabriel and I are, his assessors ring up and say, a photo opportunity, come and see me. So he takes with his courage the burden of facing the United States and saying, no, this circumstance must end. And the end can be brought about by negotiation with, say, for example, Lula or AMLO and the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. It's simple.
Muy bien, pues vamos a hacer una pausa y regresamos inmediatamente porque esta conversación está realmente buenísima. No se vayan.
Y seguimos aquí en Chamuco TV y estamos platicando ni más ni menos que con Gabriel Shipton, que es hermano de Julian Assange y productor del documental Ítaca, y con John Shipton, que es el padre de Julian Assange. Y bueno, yo quisiera señalar una cosa, es decir, Julian Assange reveló cosas realmente muy importantes a través de Wikileaks, y entre otras cosas reveló cosas centrales acerca del gobierno de México. Reveló cómo en tiempos de Vicente Fox, cuando finalizaba el sexenio de Vicente Fox, del presidente Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderón fue a la embajada de Estados Unidos a plantear que se encontraba en una situación de extrema debilidad. Y Wikileaks documentó que la Embajada de Estados Unidos hizo un equipo de la Embajada que iba a trabajar con el equipo de Calderón en el relevo. Una de las cosas que se presume, o que suponemos, o que resultan evidentes, es que una de las cosas que se pactó en esa reunión fue ni más ni menos que la guerra contra el narco. Quiero decir con esto que la aportación de Julian Assange a la vida política de México ha resultado absolutamente fundamental, ha resultado crucial y muy reveladora. Entiendo que esto también, este agradecimiento que le tiene el pueblo de México a Julian Assange, se repite en otras partes del planeta. ¿No es así, John?
Yes, that's a principal reason why Julian is pursued is not because of laws, it's because of vindictiveness and fearfulness of those who've committed crimes. The president of Bolivia once wittily remarked that there will never be a coup in Washington because there's no US embassy there. So we can understand. We can understand. We got a real insight with the cables, with the 250,000 cables, into how the United States organises its empire, the bribery, the blackmail, the corruption, the murder, that some of it was put to very good use in Mexico, and some was put to very good use by Rafael Correa in Ecuador. This was amusing. So when Rafael became president, he read the cable which indicated that the United States Embassy was paying the wages of the elite police force in Ecuador. Okay? So he's now president. He said, well, what will I do about this? This is a problem which will endanger my life and my government and my country. We can't have this. So what he did is he raised the wages of all the other policemen to the same level as the elite policemen. And this brought calm and order. So the cables, in many instances, were able to bring insight which gave good governance. I can give other examples as we go along, you know.
El presidente López Obrador, AMLO, ustedes lo conocen como AMLO, es más fácil de pronunciar AMLO en inglés, declaró recientemente que iba a hablar con Joe Biden para tratar de convencerlo de no pedir la extradición, y que si finalmente Estados Unidos lo hacía, pues no quedaba otra más que Estados Unidos regresara a la Estatua de la Libertad a Francia, porque entonces ya no tendría ningún sentido ese símbolo. ¿Qué tan importante es un apoyo como el del presidente de México? Ya más o menos lo comentaron, puede ser incluso como un ejemplo. Bueno, también John habló sobre Lula. ¿Cómo ven estos apoyos que han tenido, que son no solo el apoyo de la gente es muy importante, pero también el apoyo de gobernantes?
Yeah, I think it's supremely important to have that support, particularly in Mexico, who's one of a U.S. neighbor, and one of the leaders, if not the leader of Latin America. You have, like John was saying, you have President López Obrador saying these things, and then you'll have the new president of Colombia. He comes out and says something about Julian. Then the new president of Chile coming out and saying something. So you form these power blocks begin to form, and together they are stronger than they are just one voice. And so I think that's really important. But it's good to understand that this power that this movement for Julian comes from the people. It comes from the goodwill of the people, and that's what we've seen in Australia, is that people who support Julian they enjoy success in the elections. And, I think we've seen that with other Latin American leaders who come out in support of Julian, that they then take the goodwill of the people, that support of the people for Julian, and they turn it into electoral success. So I think that's an important element of it as well. But, your president's voice echoes all around the world. Even in Australia, there's reporting on it. In the United States. I mean, recently he's had this great. He was trolling Biden, right? Like he said, if you don't drop the charges, you may as well pack up the Statue of Liberty and send it back. And I think, that sort of thing.
Fue algo muy simbólico.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That what they're doing, is total hypocrisy. You've got even the Chinese foreign spokespeople of the CCP coming out and saying, who are you to lecture us on press freedom? You've got a journalist in prison, a publisher in prison, probably the greatest publisher, the most broken, the most stories ever. You've locked him in a prison, and so even the Russians are using Julian against the UK. So everywhere around the world, people can see this hypocrisy and they use it in their favor.
Una cosa, John ha dicho públicamente que si cae Julian, pueden caer todos los demás periodistas.
Yes, if I could add to that, it's already happened. I can't imagine any publisher willing to, or journalist willing to publish something like the cables. There's 250,000 cables. The Iraq war logs, 400,000 of those, proving that 15,000 civilians were killed in the invasion. Then there's the 90,000 Afghan war logs. I can't imagine any publisher or journalist contemplating publishing those qualities of material and stories and realising that they'll face 13 years of arbitrary detention, lies, slander, vicious hatred, malice, and then court case after court case. I try to keep track of the number of court cases. I think it's 23 now, it'll be 24 next month. 24 court cases. It's interminable. Now, after the 24, there'll be, if it goes against Julian, there'll be appeals. If Julian wins, the United States will appeal. So there'll be 2 more court cases next year, 25. It's infinite. We've spent, I guess, because I don't know, I imagine that worldwide we've spent probably $10 or $15 million on Julian's defence. Gabriel raised 54 million US on an NFT, which Gabriel can explain to you, some time ago. It's a gauge of support. And the other day in a speech, a senior politician made the observation that in the West, the governments are getting further and further from the people. Well, of course, you know what this means. You eventually have riots in the street and so on. So this is, in the circumstance of Julian Assange, the support is worldwide. There are 1,000 or so parliamentarians supporting. Parliamentarians listen to the constituents and bring the concerns of the constituents into the public. We look at the concerns and reinforce and give our energies to those parliamentarians. And in the case of Australia, we give those parliamentarians government. It's really strong. So the evasion of the understanding of Washington, that this is bringing no good to Washington whatsoever. It's a mess, a complete mess worldwide. It just reduces the stature of the United States and its administration to the point where AMLO can troll. It can say, well, you know, you're doing all right here, you better send that statue back because you don't deserve it. There's no liberty over there. Or, as Gabriel mentioned, the Foreign Affairs spokesperson for the Chinese government says, look, you people are locking up journalists. Assange, look at him, isn't there? It's now 13 years you've locked him up for. Another president, Azerbaijan, when questioned by the BBC, replies, you have destroyed physically and morally a journalist in your jails in London, and you come over here and accuse me of treating journalists poorly. I mean, the statute you need in order to negotiate with your partners in the world, you need dignity, stature, and some element of truth. You know, they've lost it.
Pues,
There's also...
eso es, perdón, es que tenemos que terminar el programa en televisión con esto de la diferencia entre escuchar a la gente, lo importante que es la gente. No se vayan, vamos a seguir en YouTube. Sáltense a la pantallita de YouTube y muchas gracias, Gabriel, muchas gracias, John. Seguimos platicando, pero nos despedimos de televisión.
Muchas gracias.
Nos vemos.